The thumping bass shook the walls of Sarah's modest townhouse as she rushed around, putting the finishing touches on the community charity event. As the head organizer, she had poured her heart and soul into making this fundraiser a success, working tirelessly for weeks to secure permits, recruit volunteers, and coordinate with local vendors. But just as the event was set to kick off, Sarah heard an all too familiar voice screeching from outside. "This is unacceptable. The noise is completely out of control." There she was, Sarah's next-door neighbor Karen, storming up the driveway with her phone in hand, face twisted in a scowl. "I'm calling the police. This is a clear violation of the noise ordinance." Sarah hurried outside, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Karen, please, this is a community charity event that was approved by the city. We have the proper permits and have kept the volume within reasonable limits." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she jammed a finger in Sarah's direction. "I don't care what kind of event this is. The noise is disturbing the entire neighborhood. You're ruining my peaceful Saturday afternoon." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and 2 police officers stepped out of a patrol car. Karen shot Sarah a triumphant glare as the officers approached. "Ma'am, we received a complaint about a noise disturbance. What seems to be the problem here?" one of the officers asked. Karen immediately launched into a tirade, painting herself as the long-suffering victim of Sarah's inconsiderate behavior. "This woman is hosting some sort of loud event without any regard for the rest of us trying to enjoy our weekends. The music is shaking my windows, and I can't even hear myself think." The officers turned to Sarah, who took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Officers, this is a community charity event that was approved by the city. We have the proper permits and have been very conscious of keeping the noise at an appropriate level." One of the officers pulled out a clipboard and quickly scanned the paperwork Sarah handed him. "Ma'am, it seems you do have the necessary permits for this event. As long as you're staying within the approved noise levels, we can't really intervene." Karen's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the officer raised a hand to silence her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but unless there's a clear violation of the law, we can't do anything about this. I'd suggest trying to work it out with your neighbor." With that, the officers turned and headed back to their patrol car, leaving a fuming Karen and a relieved Sarah in their wake. "This isn't over, you know," Karen shouted, glaring at Sarah. "I'm going to make sure you regret ever hosting this stupid event." Sarah watched as Karen stormed back to her house, already dreading what her vindictive neighbor might have in store. But for now, the charity event was safe, and Sarah was determined to make the most of it, despite Karen's best efforts to ruin it. The charity event went off without a hitch, thanks to Sarah's meticulous planning and the hard work of her dedicated volunteers. Despite Karen's furious protests, the music stayed within the approved decibel limits, and the community came together to raise thousands of dollars for a local food bank. But Sarah knew her neighbor's wrath was far from over. As the last guests filtered out and the volunteers began packing up, Sarah spotted Karen glaring at her from her front porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This isn't the end of it, you know," Karen called out, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm going to make sure you pay for this." Sarah tried to ignore the sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach as she waved and hurried back inside. She knew Karen all too well. The woman was a master of vindictive, petty retaliation. Whatever she had in store, it wasn't going to be pretty. Over the next few days, Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. Subtle acts of sabotage began to plague her, from finding nails in her driveway to discovering her flower beds had been trampled. Worst of all, she started receiving angry calls and emails from other neighbors, complaining about the loud, disruptive charity event. "I can't believe you would do this to us," one neighbor shouted over the phone. "The noise was unbearable, and now my dog won't stop barking. You should be ashamed of yourself." Sarah tried to explain the situation, but the neighbors refused to listen, convinced that she had selfishly disrupted their weekend for her own gain. Desperate, She reached out to the city to confirm the event's validity, but they seemed strangely unresponsive. As the days turned into weeks, the harassment only escalated. Karen started filing false noise complaints with the police, forcing Sarah to waste time and money dealing with the frivolous calls. Worse still, she learned that Karen had somehow managed to get the city to revoke the charity event's permit, citing excessive noise and disruption to the community. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the full extent of Karen's vindictiveness. Not only had she managed to undermine the entire charity event, but she had also turned the rest of the neighborhood against Sarah. With the permit revoked, the food bank would miss out on the much-needed funds, and Sarah's reputation in the community would be forever tarnished. Exhausted and defeated, Sarah sat down at her kitchen table, head in her hands. She had poured her heart and soul into this event, only to have it ruthlessly torn apart by her spiteful neighbor. As she contemplated her next move, a newfound determination began to take root. She wasn't going to let Karen win without a fight. Steeling her resolve, Sarah knew she couldn't let Karen's campaign of harassment continue unchecked. She had to find a way to fight back and reclaim the community's trust. But how could she possibly overcome Karen's underhanded tactics and the city's inexplicable capitulation to her demands? After a sleepless night of brainstorming, Sarah came up with a plan. She would appeal the city's decision to revoke the charity event's permit, armed with ironclad evidence of its legitimacy. But first, she needed to gather support from her fellow neighbors, the ones who had been so quick to believe Karen's lies. The next morning, Sarah set out, knocking on doors and pleading her case. It was a hard sell, as many of her neighbors were still fuming over the disruptive event. But Sarah persisted, sharing the details of the city's approval, the proper noise levels, and Karen's underhanded scheming. Slowly but surely, she began to win them over. One by one, the neighbors started to see the truth behind Karen's actions, and they pledged their support to help Sarah fight the city's decision. With a petition in hand, Sarah marched down to City Hall, determined to get the permit reinstated. The bureaucrats tried to stonewall her, citing the numerous noise complaints and Karen's influence, but Sarah refused to back down. This was a legitimate, city-approved event that brought the community together and raised money for a good cause, she argued passionately. Karen is simply a bitter, spiteful neighbor who is trying to undermine us, and you're letting her get away with it. The city officials were taken aback by Sarah's unwavering stance and the weight of the petition signatures. Realizing they could no longer ignore the evidence, they reluctantly agreed to review the case. Sarah held her breath as the review process dragged on, constantly fearing that Karen would find some new way to sabotage her efforts. But this time, the city stood firm, acknowledging the validity of the event's permits and the lack of legitimate noise violations. With a triumphant grin, Sarah received the news. The charity event's permit had been reinstated, and Karen's complaints had been summarily dismissed. She couldn't wait to rub it in her neighbor's face. As Sarah made her way home, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had stood up to Karen's bullying and won, not just for herself, but for the entire community. The charity event would be able to continue, and the food bank would get the much-needed funds. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Karen was sure to retaliate, and she would need to be vigilant. Still, she felt a renewed sense of determination. This was her community, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even a spiteful neighbor, tear it apart. As the reinstated charity event roared back to life, Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and trepidation. While she was thrilled to see the community coming together once again, she knew that Karen's wrath had only been temporarily quelled. True to form, Sarah's ornery neighbor wasted no time in plotting her next move. The very next day, Karen showed up at Sarah's door, her face twisted in a sneer. "I can't believe you had the nerve to go behind my back and overturn the city's decision," Karen spat, her voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over, you know. I'm going to make sure you and your precious little charity event regret ever setting foot in this neighborhood." Sarah stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated by Karen's threats. "This event is for a good cause, Karen. The community needs it, and I won't let you ruin it just because you're angry." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits, and she leaned in menacingly. "Oh, I'll ruin it. All right. And I'll make sure you pay for this, one way or another." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, leaving Sarah with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She knew Karen was serious, and she couldn't shake the ominous sense of dread that lingered in the air. True to her word, Karen wasted no time in escalating her campaign of harassment. She began making repeated calls to the police, reporting loud music and disruptive behavior at the charity event, despite the fact that the volume remained well within the approved limits. The police, bound by protocol, were forced to respond to each call, disrupting the event and frustrating the volunteers. Sarah watched helplessly as the city officials, eager to avoid further conflict, began to waver in their support. But Sarah refused to give up. She rallied the community, organizing peaceful protests and letter-writing campaigns to the city council, demanding that they stand firm against Karen's unrelenting attacks. The battle lines were drawn, and the entire neighborhood found itself caught in the crossfire of Sarah and Karen's bitter feud. Neighbors were forced to choose sides, with some siding with Sarah and her righteous cause, while others remained steadfast in their support of the vindictive Karen. As the tension mounted, Sarah began to fear that the charity event might not survive the onslaught. Karen had proven herself to be a formidable and ruthless adversary, and Sarah knew she would stop at nothing to destroy the community's efforts. Exhausted but determined, Sarah vowed to keep fighting. She couldn't let Karen win, not when the food bank was counting on the funds raised by the event. This was a battle for the heart and soul of the community, and Sarah was prepared to do whatever it took to emerge victorious. The charity event was teetering on the brink of collapse as Karen's relentless campaign of harassment continued to chip away at Sarah's resolve. The once vibrant and joyful gathering had become a battleground, with the community torn between supporting Sarah's noble cause and appeasing the vengeful Karen. Desperate to save the event and the funds it would provide to the local food bank, Sarah decided to take her fight directly to the city council. She knew she had to appeal to their sense of civic duty and responsibility and convince them to stand firm against Karen's bullying tactics. With a heavy heart, Sarah approached the podium at the next council meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. "Members of the council, I come before you today to plead for your support in a matter that is deeply important to our community," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "As you all know, I recently organized a charity event that was approved by the city and brought our neighbors together for a noble cause. But now, that event is under threat, thanks to the vindictive actions of one individual, my neighbor, Karen." Sarah paused, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Karen has been relentlessly harassing me and the volunteers, filing false noise complaints, and using her influence to undermine the city's original decision to grant us a permit. She's turned neighbors against each other, and she's jeopardizing the much-needed funds that the local food bank was counting on." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the growing tensions in the community. Sarah pressed on, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I've gathered a petition signed by dozens of our neighbors, all of whom have witnessed Karen's despicable behavior and support the continuation of this event. This isn't about me or my neighbor. It's about the well-being of our entire community." Sarah locked eyes with the council members, her gaze unwavering. "I'm begging you, please don't let Karen's spiteful actions destroy something that has the potential to do so much good. Stand firm in your decision and help us make this charity event a success. The food bank is counting on us, and so is the heart of our community." The council chamber fell silent as Sarah's words hung in the air. The members glanced at one another, clearly weighing the gravity of the situation. Finally, the mayor stood, her expression resolute. "Miss Sarah, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. After reviewing the evidence and hearing from the community, We have decided to reaffirm the permit for your charity event. We will not be swayed by the actions of a single individual, no matter how persistent they may be." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and Sarah felt a surge of hope. Perhaps, with the council's unwavering support, she could finally put an end to Karen's campaign of destruction. As the city council reaffirmed its support for the charity event, Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope. With the council's backing, she was confident that she could finally put an end to Karen's relentless campaign of harassment and sabotage. But just as Sarah was starting to breathe a sigh of relief, a bombshell dropped, one that would threaten to unravel everything she had fought so hard to protect. It all began with a seemingly innocuous phone call from the city's code enforcement department. The official on the other end of the line informed Sarah that an anonymous complaint had been filed about the illegal construction happening at her townhouse. Sarah's heart sank. She knew exactly who was behind this latest attack, her nemesis, Karen. "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to send an inspector out to your property to investigate the complaint," the code enforcement officer said, his voice laced with apology. "If we find any violations, you'll be required to cease construction and potentially face fines." Sarah tried to explain that there was no construction happening at her home, but the officer was bound by protocol. Within hours, a team of inspectors arrived, combing through every inch of her property. As Sarah watched helplessly, the inspectors emerged, their expressions grave. "Ma'am, we've discovered several serious violations on your property," the lead inspector announced. "It appears you've been operating an unpermitted addition to your home, as well as making unauthorized modifications to your electrical and plumbing systems." Sarah's jaw dropped in disbelief. "That's impossible. I've never done any construction or renovations to my home. This is all a lie." But the inspectors were unmoved. "I'm sorry, but the evidence is clear. We have no choice but to issue a cease and desist order and fine you for the violations. You'll have to rectify the issues before we can lift the order." Reeling from the news, Sarah knew exactly who was responsible for this latest attack. Karen had somehow managed to fabricate evidence and file a false complaint, using the city's own bureaucracy against her. As the inspectors left, Sarah's mind raced, trying to figure out how she could possibly fight this. The fines would be crippling, and a cease and desist order would effectively shut down the charity event. Just when she thought she had finally gained the upper hand, Karen had found a way to strike back with devastating consequences. Tears of frustration welled in Sarah's eyes as she realized the full extent of her neighbor's vindictiveness. Karen had not only tried to sabotage the charity event, but was now threatening to destroy Sarah's home and livelihood. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. Sarah knew she had to act fast if she wanted to save both the event and her home from Karen's relentless onslaught. As the reality of the city's cease and desist order and the looming fines sank in, Sarah felt her world crumbling around her. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Karen was behind this latest attack, but proving it would be an uphill battle. Determined to fight back, Sarah sprang into action, determined to uncover the truth and expose Karen's deceitful scheme. She pored over the inspection reports, searching for any inconsistencies or irregularities that could point to foul play. As she delved deeper, a startling realization dawned on her. The so-called violations cited by the inspectors didn't match the actual state of her home. The electrical and plumbing systems were well within code, and there was no evidence of any unpermitted construction or additions. Fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah reached out to her neighbors, pleading with them to help her investigate the matter further. To her surprise, many of them were eager to lend a hand, having grown weary of Karen's increasingly erratic and destructive behavior. Together, they pored over old permits, inspected the property, and even enlisted the help of a private investigator. And as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, a shocking truth emerged. The evidence clearly showed that the inspection reports had been falsified, with doctored photographs and fabricated documentation. It was a well-orchestrated scheme, designed to bring Sarah's world crashing down. Armed with this damning evidence, Sarah confronted the city officials, demanding a thorough investigation. The council members, once again faced with the weight of her arguments and the community's support, reluctantly agreed to re-examine the case. As the investigation unfolded, the truth slowly came to light. Karen's fingerprints were all over the forged documents, and it became clear that she had bribed a corrupt city inspector to carry out her vendetta against Sarah. The council members were outraged, condemning Karen's actions in the strongest possible terms. They immediately rescinded the cease and desist order, apologized to Sarah, and promised to hold the responsible parties accountable. Sarah felt a surge of vindication, but her relief was tinged with a sense of unease. She knew that Karen would not take this defeat lying down, and that the war between them was far from over. As the charity event roared back to life, Sarah steeled herself for the inevitable counterattack. She had won this battle, but the war was just beginning, and she knew that Karen would stop at nothing to see her, and her beloved community event, destroyed. With the city's apology and the revocation of the cease and desist order, Sarah's charity event was back on track, but she knew that the battle with Karen was far from over. Her vindictive neighbor would undoubtedly retaliate, and Sarah had to be prepared for whatever she had in store. Sure enough, just days after the event resumed, Sarah's tires were slashed, and her mailbox was smashed to pieces. The vandalism was clearly Karen's work, a desperate attempt to undermine the community's faith in Sarah and her efforts. But this time, Sarah was ready. She had enlisted the help of the local police, who agreed to increase patrols in the neighborhood and keep a close eye on Karen's activities. And when the vandalism continued, they were able to catch Karen in the act, thanks to a strategically placed security camera. The sight of Karen being hauled away in handcuffs was immensely satisfying for Sarah, but it was only the beginning of her comeuppance. As the investigation deepened, the full extent of Karen's misdeeds came to light, and the consequences were swift and severe. It turned out that Karen's forged inspection reports were just the tip of the iceberg. The private investigator uncovered a long history of her harassing and bullying behavior, all in the name of her own petty vendettas. She had made false complaints, bribed officials, and even threatened other neighbors who dared to stand up to her. The city council, outraged by the revelations, wasted no time in taking action. Karen was slapped with hefty fines, ordered to pay restitution to the victims of her schemes, and ultimately banned from holding any position of authority within the community. But the ultimate humiliation came when the charity event, bolstered by the community's renewed support, became a resounding success. The funds raised for the local food bank exceeded all expectations, and Sarah was hailed as a hero for her perseverance and unwavering commitment to her cause. As for Karen, her once formidable reputation lay in tatters. She became a pariah in the community, shunned by her neighbors, and stripped of the power she had wielded for so long. Her petty acts of vengeance had backfired spectacularly, and she was forced to face the consequences of her actions. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as she watched Karen's downfall. She had fought tirelessly to protect the community and the charity event she had poured her heart into, and in the end, she had emerged victorious. As the final preparations for the event were underway, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. It had been a long and arduous battle, filled with setbacks and challenges, but in the end, the community had come together, united against the selfish and spiteful actions of one individual. And as the event kicked off, with the sounds of music and laughter filling the air, Sarah knew that this was more than just a charity fundraiser. It was a testament to the power of a community to overcome adversity and emerge stronger than ever.